Hi everyone, I'm Mr. Moderator. My name is Kong Ho. I'm the tech editor at South China Morning Post. Very happy to be here. And today we're going to talk about innovation, specifically about corporate venture building. And we have very esteemed panelists here. I'm going to outsource the introduction to them. So can you please tell us who you are and very succinctly what you do?
Rosaline, I'm the founder of CXA. We are an employee benefits ecosystem platform that's being outsourced and white labeled by the banks for all of their business banking clients.
Hi everyone, pleasure to be here. My name is Hanno. I run BCG Digital Ventures here in Southeast Asia. We are a corporate venture builder. That means we build new startups together with corporates. Before that, I was already in the venture building space, and I was running Rocket Internet, a big corporate venture or big venture builder without the corporate here in the region. And now I switched a little bit from independent venture building to corporate venture building, and happy to share some experiences around that with you.
Hi, my name is Oliver. I am the practice manager for the IBM Cloud Garage here in Singapore. And we have about 20 people here serving our clients and startups to help them innovate and leverage on IBM Cloud. Pleasure meeting you all.
Okay, let's get right into it. So when we talk about innovation, there's a bit of an innovation paradox where a lot of the established market leaders in every industry imaginable, they get to where they are and then they kind of stagnate. History is littered with examples of such companies. Just off the top of my head, a very famous example would be Kodak, right? I mean, 90% of the world's physical film market share at its peak, they actually invented the first digital camera in 1973. And look what happened. They filed for bankruptcy protection, I believe, in 2012. And today, digital cameras are in every smartphone, and they're not in it. In my own industry, newspapers, I remember when I first started my career, there was this revolutionary concept called the free commuter paper, where we print the news on paper and we give it out to people taking the subway to work. And now information basically is free on the internet. So newspapers themselves have been disrupted. And I can go on and on. There are examples of such giants in the industry that are being disrupted. So for this panel, I would really like to find out, why can't the giants innovate? Or rather, why can't the giants who die off innovate? They obviously did something right to get to where they are. What changed and why did they stop? Maybe Rosaline, I can start off with you. You led Mercer Marsh Benefits, which is one of the largest healthcare platforms in Asia. And yet you had to come out and start your own startup. Why couldn't you have done what you're doing now in your previous employer?
So I was running the 14 countries, and we actually grew 800% using humans. But when I try to convince them, 5 years in a row, I had to try to convince 100 people and got all the way up to the CEO every year for 5 years. They said no every single year. And all I wanted was $10 million to build the tech. So they said no every year. So I left to build it on my own, but it was my $10 million, not the firm's $10 million. That $10 million meant much more to me. So I had to leave to build it, and now I have 600 of their clients, and most of their employees.
So you were the regional head in Asia.
I was the regional head. I was actually on the operating committee for the company in New York representing Asia. So I was always in New York every quarter.
Yeah, so
and I still couldn't convince them.
You had access to the decision makers. You are one of the decision makers.
I was, yeah. But look, I couldn't convince them.
Why did they say no?
There's a huge fear of failure, right? What if we spend the money and it doesn't work? Or what if we spend the money and it does work and we cannibalize ourselves? And then there's these layers of middle management where their jobs would all change if that happened. So everyone fought this.
I think there's a growing awareness for companies that they do need to innovate, and maybe sometimes the way to do that may not be through internal R&D. Hanno, maybe you can tell us from your experience, what are some of the ways that companies can structure their corporate venture building efforts, and what are some of the pros and cons for each method?
I think first, what you are both referring to is the very classical thing called the innovator's dilemma, right? So that you are fear about change. You fear change. You often see something small that's starting as so small compared to your massive revenue that you say you don't want to invest your best talent into something that's so small. So it gets just kind of forgotten a bit on the side. Change was mentioned as a big problem as well. So most people don't like change. So how do you want to change your culture if you don't embrace it from the top? Fear of cannibalization is something very, very, very big and prevailing, which is kind of a big issue for cannibalization. And then it's also just the lack of talent and experience, because big corporates have, of course, a fantastic machine, so to speak, that is running and that is working. But how do you get now new bits and pieces, new people in that do things very differently, work agile, work like a startup, work in multidisciplinary teams and all of that. So I think these are a lot of the good reasons. But I think there are still a lot of opportunities how to break through. And the typical concepts that I have seen in the market are probably 4 or 5. The classical way of innovation for a lot of big corporates, it's still M&A. You just acquire ideas, you acquire companies, you acquire talent. We can probably have a half an hour debate whether M&A is working and the differences around or difficulties around post-merger integration to retain cultures, etc. And I think there have been a lot of studies to say that in most cases M&A is actually not value accretive but rather value destructive. Then you have probably every company now, or at least every larger company, building something like a digital lab or a little accelerator. That is, I think, a great way to inspire people to get a first foot into a startup ecosystem, to learn, to get inspiration. Problem, however, is very often that a lot of those initiatives stay small. They don't really go above the proof of concept or small partnership stage. And then even if it works, typically the corporate doesn't own the new venture because they just help to accelerate or help to get it out of the ground, but it's not like it's a strategic asset they own. Then, of course, corporate venture capital. I myself run a CVC fund for some years, and investing in startups to get a first foot in the door, probably to try also to get the right to acquire the company when it's successful or acquire at least more shares, is another way of corporate innovation. Again, opportunities is that you can mix kind of knowledge gain with financial gain. Some downsides are, of course, related to the fact that you still typically own only small stakes, that you very often don't get the best deal flow because you're seen as strategic, you're seen of having a hidden agenda, which not always may be in the same interest compared to the founder team or other VCs. And last but not least, there's corporate venture building. I don't make the big pitch of corporate venture building now because that's what we are doing. But I think the benefit of corporate venture building can be that you work with partners who are serial entrepreneurs, who know what it takes to build a startup and scale a startup, but you mix it with the assets that big corporates have. And that is what we try to do ourselves, to say, what are the big assets a certain company has? how can we mix it with a startup team and then launch a company together that in the end has the benefit of having access to these assets. That could be brand, customers, IP, a lot of other things. But it's still run as a startup and as an independent startup, and we help to bring the talent and the kind of people to make sure it scales.
Okay, we'll come back to some of the themes and do a deeper dive. But first, Oliver, what is IBM Cloud Garage for those who may not be too familiar, and what does it do for IBM?
Sure. So the IBM Cloud Garage, or the cloud, the garage for cloud and cognitive, as we're called now, is really a startup within IBM that helps our clients and new to IBM clients to leverage cloud technology to innovate, to be, to go about doing things rapidly. So apart from the technology that we obviously offer, we also work with the clients on the change management aspect of it, on the culture they need to actually embrace innovation. We love to call it disruption. We go a little bit further than just innovation. But the culture is so important, as you said, right, to embrace that and try to be different, be open. With that, we work with the client to adopt agile and lean principles to help them understand that as well, break down the projects in smaller, more consumable portions, what we call MVPs, minimal viable products. So be able to do things very, very fast. In usually 6 to 12 weeks, we'll launch a new product, bring it out to the market, and help the client sustain that, right? So doing away with the firefighting really helps them to then use the time they freed up to innovate. And I think that's so important. Yeah.
Why did IBM think it was necessary to do this? These are customers, right?
Yeah. So these are clients, but we also work with IBM people internally. So, for instance, the finance department would come to us, or say audit, or they work with us and embrace our methodology that really starts with finding out what is the problem, what are we, what prohibits us from achieving our vision, and then we work with the client, internal or external, to uncover that and ideate. So we use design thinking a lot to ideate around that solution. But most importantly, we always first create a vision. So where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? And what stops you from achieving that? And then we work backwards, uncovering those issues, and then try to find a solution for that. And frankly, it can be a paper solution first. It doesn't necessarily have to be technology. So if there's something that prohibits us from achieving that, like an internal process, a software development lifecycle process, or a PMO process that prohibits us from gaining access to funds, for instance, or having to write huge documents, before we can then go and implement something, will help the client to break down those barriers first. And then, so that's the culture, being more agile. And then we go about looking at technological solutions.
Okay. I get what the garage does for the customers, but what does IBM get out of it?
What do we get out of it? So we're a services business. So we're professional services at the Cloud Garage, and so that's how we get returns. But obviously, the main reason to exist for the garage here for cloud and cognitive is to help clients adopt IBM Cloud and all the services that come with it. So you heard of Watson, for instance, data analytics. You heard of IoT that IBM offers. So those are the things we like the clients to adopt, because we think their IBM Cloud is a very solid platform and highly secure. So that's our main reason to exist. Yeah.
I think one of the main, like you said, one of the main reasons, besides helping customers grow together with the company, is also companies need access to emerging technologies, what's new, so that they don't get sidelined, they don't get blindsided. What is the? I want to go back into a bit deeper. What is the best way to do this, if not through your internal R&D? And where do you park this unit? Do you park it under the CEO's office? But like you said, sometimes having access to the CEO isn't enough. Do you have
Maybe the
it?
CEO's afraid.
We will come to culture after that. Yeah. Where do you build the proverbial woodshed? You know, how arm's length do you have to be to really have that kind of innovative approach? Anyone?
You know, perhaps just from a couple of experiences of ventures we built. I mean, first, I think that's one of the most critical points and one of the elements you must get right. Because it needs to be a very fine balance between being able to access the assets of the corporate and of the big conglomerate, but still, you know, not to stop a new unit, a new venture, to establishing an own culture, an own way of working. That's very different. So what we typically advise is hire different people. Don't let your existing people run this, but try to get people from the startup ecosystem with a very different mindset and experience to lead this new unit. So we do a lot of hiring of talent as part of the ventures we are building. Number two is we don't start building a venture if we don't have an executive sponsor. That doesn't need to be the CEO, but there must be a sponsor who believes in the vision, who wants to make it work, and who's also helping to make certain shortcuts that are required to take decisions and get stuff done. And number three is we try to structure these new units as much as possible as we would structure a venture. That means independent legal entity, advisory board or venture board kind of setup, ESOP and equity-like incentives for the management team to make sure, you know, these kind of structural incentives and governance topics are aligned. That's not always possible in every corporate context, but at least if you try to give it a push in this direction, the chances of success are much higher. And I've seen so many great ideas dying because, you know, kind of an unexperienced corporate manager just took over and started to manage that like a project and not like a company, because people didn't get the right incentives, or the HR department said, oh, let's follow please our job descriptions and hire people how we used to hire them in the past into these new organizations. So these are a couple of things I would advise everyone to watch out for.
So I took 10 investors this last round, all corporates, because I got tired of my VCs, right? Because not helping. And I can tell you, for some banks where we work with the innovation team reporting to the CEO, things are done just like that. But where they've left us to work with the business, we're almost strangled to death, right? And we are just digitizing, putting on computers things from paper, right? We're not fixing processes. Everything's waterfall, right? We spend all our time checking a box. So I agree with you, because that's what we do. We work with the big guys because they all invested in us, and we're building businesses for them to cross-sell their clients.
I would also totally agree with you both, and so sometimes we struggle when we work with the team, say in DevOps or in IT, you know, say we create microservices on the cloud, but then it doesn't stick because no one supports them. So we really have to find that sponsor, and if it's a CEO, that's beautiful. It must be someone that has, you know, the power to say, yes, I want this, and I take the risk, and I'll go with you. If you fail, that's fine. We'll pick you up, and we'll learn together, and we go that route. Otherwise, it will not fly. It will not stick. Yeah, absolutely.
Rosaline, you mentioned this fear of failure as one of the crippling kind of cultural barrier to innovation. How are you preventing that from happening in your own startup now that you're doing your own thing?
Wow, okay, so in our startup, we've changed people over time. So I've just finished my third round of funding after self-funding the whole thing. And in each round, we actually have different types of leadership. So now we're about to scale because we have to go global. And I have to take out some of the corporate people who I needed earlier to cross-sell, right? Because they're so fearful. It's almost as if they're taking shots from the side, being very negative. Why are you bringing other people in that I have to report to? I used to do everything for you.
Yeah, I stuck with you when you were nothing, right?
No, I have to clean that up because that negativity and that poison will kill the firm, especially if they're senior. So
You're betraying us. We were the pioneers. We were in the trenches with
exactly,
you.
that's what I hear, right? But you are dragging me down, right? So no, it is so difficult, right? It's so difficult as you evolve because you do need different types of people at different stages.
And perhaps just to add to that, one element that we try to implement in our venture builds, for example, when it comes to addressing this fear, is to be extremely transparent how to manage risk, right? Because I think that's also a cultural thing. Very often you don't talk about risks. So you rather try to hide risks and you try to hide failure. So one of the first things we try to bring up is something that we call a risk map. And we flesh out all the things that can go wrong, or at least most of the things we are aware of that can go wrong, and we tell it in the face, even of the sponsor, to say these are all the risks. We even have kind of a tool for that, and then we jointly work towards burning down the biggest risk. So it doesn't completely prevent you from failure, but it creates a very different kind of inclusivity in the process, so that you're not hiding the risk. You are upfront and saying, this is a startup, we're building a company, tons of things can go wrong, but at least we have identified the biggest things that may go wrong and where it's also kind of a red flag. These are the things we are doing to burn down those risk elements, and we share with you how we are going, right? So, and failure, it's always so easy to say, oh, fail fast and failure is good. Of course it's not, right? So if you're a corporate CEO, you say, I spent 5-10 million to invest in this idea, and it goes wrong and the result is zero. Of course, it's an issue for you, right? For your job, perhaps even, and for a career and whatsoever. But then at least it's important to be extremely transparent to see what have you done to prevent failure. How could you pivot? How could you change? What have you addressed, etc. That gives at least a very different comfort level. But having said that, we are still in the business of setting up a new company, and we all know how difficult that is and how many startups also get shut down. So it's important to be transparent, in my point of view, to focus on the key risks, but then also to have a bit of the gut to say it's still better than doing nothing, right? Because doing nothing may leave you to ending like Kodak. So the risk is still worth it, right?
I think most of us will agree that most corporates, OKR everyone knows OKRs, KPIs. Most corporates structure their OKRs to measure success, not failure. Do you need a more formal structure to quantify what is acceptable failure and to even acknowledge that there will be failure? Because just now you talked about how you have to be transparent about risk, so that there is buy-in that there will be failure and you won't lose a job because of it, because it's part of the course. But just for the corporate managers among us, is there a structure? Or the flip side to the question, what does success look like for you in corporate venture building? Oliver? Yeah.
Well, I think we need to talk about the definition of failure. So failure obviously doesn't mean that you completely, lose. So we should prevent using the whole capital by all means. But I think failure means that you allow yourself to learn, that you test something out, and that thing that you test out must be very small, so that your failure is not substantial too big, right? But what you need in a corporate, in my opinion, you can better comment on that, Hanno, but I think you really need to tell your people that it's okay to test something out and recognize that it didn't work, and then you go and try to do something differently. So you need to instill that or take away the fear. So it is fine, but you shouldn't make the same mistake twice, obviously. So we need to learn from the failure and get better at what you're doing. And hey, your daily stand-ups help with your communication. So you be open. You create a culture of inclusion rather than exclusion. I think it's very important. And I've seen it in large corporations. There's still these walls, these barriers. So I don't talk to you. I don't want to be open. Let's break down those barriers, because then your failures also can be managed much better. You be transparent about your fear and your risk. And hey, I think if I do this, this may happen. Can you help me with that? So I think that's the culture and the communication, the inclusion, the co-creation. I think that's important.
But for those of us who like to quantify things, what you just said is very touchy-feely, embrace, failure, fail fast, and all that. But for those who like to count things, is there a way to quantify it?
But very good question. We normally don't.
Because, like, for example, I mean, for most companies, financial returns is kind of like number one.
Right.
You're in business to make money, right? Risk-adjusted returns, financial returns, cost of capital deployed, etc., etc. You know this better than me.
Yep.
For a corporate venture builder, because you are trying to future-proof your companies in a way, right, to get innovation into the company, how should you measure this? What if not financial returns?
I worked for a fund before, and I had kind of even a CFO role there. So I was the guy looking at the numbers, and I would still say, in the end, everything we do should be an NPV positive project and should have a positive return on invest. I think the big challenge in the corporate environment is sometimes, what is the time horizon that I need to apply to measure it? And I think there's the biggest struggles we face, because typically a corporate thinks in a yearly budget or even quarterly budget. And this is now not how you can measure a startup or a new initiative, but it's more a VC horizon, where you think about a 5-year horizon, a 6 or 7 year horizon. That means you shouldn't apply the same kind of diligence to apply also financial measures. So I also have seen too many programs that say, come on, it's kind of, we are early stage, so please don't give us a business plan, please don't measure us, we work it out. And then there was never any sense of making money, delivering returns. But I would just argue the time horizon needs to be different. And still, very importantly, if you go on a journey as a corporate venture or as any venture, after a certain amount of time, and let that be 5-6 years, you need to show that you are delivering on your promises, on your business case, and that needs to include financial returns.
Yeah, I would also agree. So let me just say, when I said before, we normally don't measure that or quantify the risk, because it is, first of all, very hard to do that in a startup mode or in an innovation project. But the product that you bring out to the market, and the MVP by all means should be something that you roll out to the market. This is when you start measuring. You had your hypothesis, you know what you wanted to achieve, then you start measuring. If that doesn't come true, you need to stop it, you need to kill it. And this is where you know that things don't work. And then you may have a better understanding on how you can quantify the risk and how far you can go, quite frankly. So.
Thank you.
You guys have much more time than startups have to get traction.
I think our projects are much smaller than a whole startup, right? So our projects with corporates are very small, very quick. We don't roll out a brand new product like your company, right? We may roll out a change or work on a new offering. It's not like normally we don't do a whole new product, but if we do that, obviously then different teams from IBM would be engaged and work on a whole transformation of the company, and that's where we would create business cases and ROI studies and make sure that you get where you're paying for. Yeah.
Okay, we have 2 minutes. I'll just do a quick sum up and maybe ask each of our panelists to give a key takeaway, so to speak. So we've heard that for corporate venture building to be successful, you need a champion, an internal champion with clout, who needs to buy into the process. You need to embrace a culture of acknowledging that failure is not the be-all and end-all, that you can learn from failure. There is value in failure, as long as you don't keep repeating the same mistakes. We also heard from you guys that even though financial returns may not be the top line kind of measure, there needs to be some discipline and structure in terms of how I'm deploying money, how I'm trying to engender innovation. So maybe just for the benefit of our audience, one key takeaway from each of you.
So if you don't fix your firm, sometimes your employees may leave and fix it from the outside. So it may not come from stealth people. It could come from your employees who are just fed up.
And I would just advise everyone to put in your innovation portfolio some space for corporate venture building, because I believe, especially in a region like here, where there are so many opportunities of assets that big corporates can leverage, and also the power of these assets are very strong. I believe this can be a big driver for innovation in Singapore, but in all over Southeast Asia. And I would guess we see a lot of successful kind of unicorn types of startups in the future who are also supported and built by corporates. So don't miss that train.
Yeah, and I would say that the culture is so important, so embrace that and make sure your team understands that it is, they are encouraged to experiment and try out new things, and that they can frankly fail, and that someone picks them up and helps them and guides them to that success that you're looking for.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.